and gentlemen, heartily good morning to each one of you that did the effort on a Saturday morning to join us at the helicopter safety seminar. On behalf of Henley Air, I would like to welcome each and every one of you. The fact that we are prepared to take a bit of time out of our busy schedules to focus on safety speaks about the culture that we wish to create in the helicopter and in the aviation industry. This morning we sit with a diverse group of aviation specialists that will share with each one of us their unique stories, their unique experiences, and their unique specialities. Just to give you some idea of the quality of of the individuals that's gonna share their stories with you this morning. Between all of them, they have accumulated more than 50,000 hours of flying. There are 4 PhD degrees between these remarkable individuals. And what they have experienced and learned is something that we could all benefit from. I would like to encourage each and every one of you to ask the questions. Nog nie nou nie om frik. To ask the questions, mingle with each other. This is the unique opportunity for us all to get better. Welcome. Just quickly, the agenda for the day. There are the tea of times. First, we're going to have Bezuidenhout that's going to join us. The program itself, we will play a little bit by ear. And the reason being is we feel that each and every one here might ask a question that will divert us into a very specific direction. We also know that we are going to have a couple of breaks in between, and we want the engagement to be as authentic as possible. We also sit with a possible case study we can discuss, and we also sit with a wonderful international friend from Bell, Terry, that has come to visit us, and perhaps we can even get some international experience and an international perspective of what we are doing here today. So that's the plan, but it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our first speaker of the morning. Bezuidenhout is a legend in his own right. We all at Rand often hear his voice over the radio, his stories in the coffee shop. He is a remarkable individual. He was born in Buzz. That's the only thing that you haven't put down on your CV is when you were born. However, he matriculated in 1968. So therefore, okay. Thanks, Mbaz. So, born in 1950, matriculated in 1968, joined the South African Air Force, and was involved with military operations between 1972 and 1974 on the Namibian and Zimbabwe borders. He's been actively involved in the civilian aviation market since 1974. He's accumulated well over 22,000 flying hours. Remarkable. And I'll go as far back as to say we sit with a wonderful speaker that will speak a little bit later, Johan Kutsia, who is the godfather and the founding member of Henley Air. He started training in 1981, and Buzz was his instructor. Just shows you the experience that we have. Buzz, we are privileged to welcome you to here this morning, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
welcome to all of you, and congratulations to Henny, because I think they're going to award the Oscars after we finished our speeches here, because I've never stood on a stage like this and lectured people. Okay. There's a reflection of light on this thing. I can't read it. Tomorrow. Okay, safety starts with you, and we'll look at various things here. We'll look at simplistic stuff. Okay, I know most of you, so what I've done with you in the aircraft, you're going to hear again. If you really get bored, chase me off the stage. Factors of aviation safety beyond the pilot's control. We're going to look at weather, ATC errors. Where's Byron? Aircraft maintenance issues. And let's continue. Okay. I couldn't find a picture of you, Byron. I had to find those. All right. So have a good look at them. I don't want to be too serious today. There's ATC. Okay, and engineers with half their buttocks exposed, working on machines, aircraft maintenance issues, and various other things. Design flaws in the manufacture and defects, regulatory compliance issues, airport infrastructure limitations. There's a million other things. Okay. This is something that I frequently see at flight training schools, is people flying with wife-beater vests on and shorts and pluckies. Do you guys know why I wear gloves in a flight suit? And I wear glasses, dark glasses. I've told you all. I wear dark glasses when I'm training you so you can't see my eyes are closed and my knuckles are white in the gloves. Okay, safety ends with you as a pilot. It starts with you and ends with you, and there's a bunch of factors to consider. General knowledge of the technical of the helicopters and their systems are found, not for you people, but with most people that I test, their technical knowledge is not good. That kid who was killed a week ago in a Long Ranger, that was a technical problem, and it was his lack of knowledge that caused his death. Okay, so think about that. As instructors, what you guys should do, or ladies as well, is some technical training. Maybe sit for an hour before you go and fly with somebody to do some training or a test with them, and just refresh their memories on technical, on the background of the machine. You know, I look at all these faces and it's scary because I know most of you. Unbelievable. Okay, safety, have a look there. Helicopter safety. And the aviation world can be defined in many ways. From the reactive point of view, safety essentially means a lack of accidents, absence of injuries in a general environment where things don't go wrong. From the proactive point of view, this environment will not exist for any consistent amount of time unless certain active safety-related principles are put in place and specified safety attitudes are fostered and strengthened. Whether we are strengthening a person's safety attitude, bolstering a team's safety convictions, or nurturing an entire safety culture, focusing every member of an aviation team at every level on clear and tangible convictions needs to be a central goal. Right now, I'm going to ask you, all the pilots here, you look at any flight manual, there's about 5 or 6 elements in it. General, normal procedures, emergencies, mass and balance, performance, systems description. And then the optional part of it is another flight manual, because the options are always bigger than the flight manual. Which part of the flight manual is not negotiable of those 5 or 6 elements? Think about it. I can't hear you. Limitations. Mass and balance. Performance. Certification procedures are very strict, so Whether you're flying a fixed wing or 747 or whatever, Adam will support me here, the manual's performance parameters are very accurate, extremely accurate. So those are non-negotiable elements of the flight manual. The rest of the flight manual is a pilot's decision. Think about that. When you do a confined area approach in the helicopter, what are you doing? You're intruding onto this height velocity curve. Think about that. I once had a chip light on a 212, 150 nautical miles offshore. The manual, Bell, Terry will confirm this. The manual in the Bell says if you have a chip light on anything, you land as soon as possible. Now, I was sitting over the Atlantic, 150 nautical miles offshore. What did we do? We just looked at each other and carried on flying. But we flew close to the ships in the shipping lane, so if we had a problem, we would land next to a ship. Pilot's decision. Remember, a chip light can mean sludge in the oil or an imminent failure of a component in 30 seconds. You can't ignore it. That's why Bell says land as soon as possible, regardless of what you see on temperatures and pressures. If temperatures and pressures confirm it, you land immediately. Do you all agree? You're all looking bored already. Okay, this is what we're going to discuss today. You should be constantly processing all factors due to the nature of low-level operations. To give you an example, all the light singles I fly, if I demonstrate the height velocity curve to people, it doesn't matter whether it's a 407 hovering at 700 feet or a jet ranger hovering at 450 feet. From that height, in a controlled environment into wind, you're on the ground in less than 15 seconds. At 45 knots and 300 feet, with all of them, you're on the ground in 9 seconds. So Terry won't agree with me now, but whenever you look in a flight manual and it says, this is the engine restart procedure, what are you going to do with a helicopter with a restart procedure? Please. You need to be 10,000 foot AGL to restart most helicopters. That's a certification requirement. Terry, where are you? If you disagree with me, shout. Okay. I learned a lot of this stuff from Bell, what I told you about. All right. A more widespread safety culture can be developed if the principles are kept simple and straightforward and relate to each individual. What I call the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. Okay. So we'll discuss all those things. Your flight decisions need to be determined by safe actions. You need to take a proactive approach to solving safety issues. You must never carry out any unsafe actions or unprofessional behavior. You should be continually looking for new safety knowledge and information. Now bear in mind as well that aviation is like life. There's a process of self-education. You don't wait until you talk to an instructor or somebody who knows what they're talking about to learn. You educate yourself as well. You read, talk to people with experience and learn stuff. People often say to me, I'm going to ask you a stupid question. There's no such thing. There's a difference between ignorance and stupidity. Do you agree with me, Johan? You don't? Okay, I thought you would. You're probably going to shit on me when you give your lecture. Okay. But anyway, that is what it's about. Okay, that is life as well. All right, you should be continually looking for new safety knowledge and information, self-education. You need to find ways to invest and use technology that improves safety. Look what I've written in red there. If you think training is expensive, try an accident. Vicky, how often have people come to you and said, no, that's too expensive, I can't do that, after they've bought a helicopter? Think about that. Okay. Can you see anything wrong with those guys doing all their checks? We're the airline pilots. Huh? They're doing all the checks, but they haven't disengaged the passenger boarding thing. Okay. PAVE is, there are so many numerous checks. If you go onto the internet, you'll find PAVE, I'm safe, foredeck, all kinds of checks. Okay. I like the PAVE one because it covers most things and I'm safe. So let's continue with this. Pilot in command, the implementation of the I'm safe shows I'm safe documents list the pilot is able to answer any questions on which he or she may need assurance in regard to their physical and emotional condition. The pilot should always be in a position to make decisions when it reports their level of fatigue, health, mental state, and any other variables that they know may affect them performing effectively in a safe manner. I've told most of you that sometimes I've postponed flight tests with people because they think I'm talking nonsense to them and drinking coffee for 30 minutes. And what am I doing? I'm mentally probing them to see where they are, domestically and business-wise, because they feel obligated if they booked a test with me to come to me, okay? And I've postponed a couple of people. And by the way, I don't charge them a cancellation fee, so don't feel bad, okay? All right. The pilot and the aircraft we've discussed, the psychological aspects we'll discuss later. The pilot should seek to determine any conditions the aircraft may pose on the safety of the trip, for example. Most of you as pilots know, I'm not going to repeat all this, aircraft's got to be 100% serviceable. That means every document in the aircraft must be up to date, signed out, certificate of safety, certificate of registration, certificate of release, flight manual, radio license, insurance, AOC copies, all that stuff must be in the machine. Okay, so if you've got any questions on that, let me know. Okay, you can scroll on. Environment, very important. These include Byron, air traffic control, terrains, surrounding obstacles, weather, serviceability of navigational aids, nav aids, and after takeoff and landing areas. Most navigation and letdown procedures now are based on GNSS, so I wouldn't worry too much about nav aids. If any of you IF rated will know, if you look at the Jefferson charts, you'll see everything nowadays is RNAV. In fact, when I test people, I make them come to me with a certificate so I can issue an RNAV endorsement for them. Okay, external pressure. These factors are factors that influence the flight externally, which creates a sense of time-related pressure for the pilot to complete the flight. These pressures include, but are not limited to, trip planning, diversion or cancellation plans, if the need does arise due to bad weather. How many of you got children of about 12, 15 years old? Elton, if you give your kids the numbers, you say to them, you've got to fly to Durban, this is the distance, this is the speed, this is the height I'll be flying, and this is the fuel burn. They can work it out. It's simplistic. What complicates aviation? Human beings, number one. Wind and weather. Otherwise, aviation would be very simplistic. Okay. I'm glad you're here. The PAVE list is normally incorporated in the pre-flight checklist. Using the list before each flight enables you, the pilot, to determine risks that may affect the safety of the flight. Once the risk has been identified, you perceive whether the risk can safely and successfully be managed. If the risks are too high, then you must make a decision of cancelling the flight altogether. However, if you decide once you perceive the risks that you still want to carry on with the flight, then strategies to reduce the risk must be implemented. One way you can control risk is by setting personal minimums for each risk category. Those are limits that are unique to your level of proficiency and level of experience. You know your own personal minimums and what you can do and can't do under limits that will in no way affect the safety of the flight. Your personal minima also must not contradict the legal limits regarding regulations. I say that with my tongue in my cheek. Before you fly, you should also ensure that you are not hindered physically or mentally This can be achieved through passing all requirements of the I'm Safe checklist before every flight. Scroll. Are we finished there? Okay. All right. Just take it up, please. Yeah. There's I'm Safe. It's pretty straightforward. Look at illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, emotion. You all know about my ratio, hey? I've explained my ratio to all of you with my blood circulation. I had a medical problem. My wife sends blood to my doctor every 6 months, and he told me I had a circulatory problem. Most of you know this. And I said, what do you mean? You know, my blood pressure, everything's normal. He said, no, I analyzed your blood. 60% of your blood circulation is Captain Morgan, and 40% is red blood cells. And he said, if you change that ratio, you get grumpy. Let's go on. Okay. Medication, be careful. Do you know that if you have an aspirin tablet, you're supposed to have a 24-hour break before you go and fly? Aspirin. Think about that. I'm lucky I'm married to a doctor and my daughter's a physio, so I don't have medical problems. But be careful of medication. Over-the-counter medications are readily available, and pilots frequently underestimate the deleterious effects and the impairment caused by these sedating drugs. Despite specific federal regulations and education efforts regarding flying, while impaired, over-the-counter medication usage by pilots remains a factor in 10 to 13% of aircraft accidents. The USHST, the United States Helicopter Safety Team, believes that the helicopter community needs an increased awareness of the potentially disastrous results of operating an aircraft while under the influence of medication or alcohol. Okay, get home-itis. Who doesn't know about that phrase? Who knows what causes it? Okay, this will always be an extremely dangerous phenomenon and frequently drives even normally cautious and conservative pilots to often risk their own lives and the lives of their passengers in order to accomplish or complete a flight, whatever the conditions. It is one bad decision leading to another bad decision, leading to an even worse decision, and inevitably ending with severe consequences. It can be summarized, in my opinion, as follows. Now, I've told most of you that what I'm briefing you about here, I've got the t-shirts. Okay? And there's some t-shirts I don't want you to wear. Trust me. Okay. Firstly, I did a kind of a psychological analysis of it. Johan's going to disagree with me, I know. Individuals, pilots, are generally above average intelligence. We all know there's a lot of pooples out there as well, but most pilots are above average intelligence. That's a generalization which I hope includes me, okay? Secondly, pilots are egocentric. This is not meant in a negative sense, okay? Because if we didn't have egos, we'd all be zombies wandering around. Okay? Some to a greater and some to a lesser degree than others. Like doctors, however, pilots have power over life and death over other professionals. Think about that. Imagine the mental state of the PIC of an Airbus 380, which has 650 passengers seated behind him in the cabin. I say this with respect. But that guy, as a captain, is bordering on a God complex, since the passenger's continued existence depends entirely upon him and his expertise. laid plan disintegrates. Think about that. In other words, the individual has to concede defeat or failure. We don't want to do that. You know, if somebody breaks into your house and threatens your family, that's worth risking your life for. If you're flying from here to Virginia, why are you going to risk your life if you have bad weather at Harrismith? Because you know you're going to encounter bad weather there. I've stopped at the Wimpy there how many times to have breakfast and wait for the weather to clear. Okay, so that you've got to be careful of. It's psychological. This is contrary to human nature, since no one wants to concede defeat or failure. The logical consequence of this is that many pilots will push the envelope and take risks to avoid the plan coming apart. This can be mitigated, and this was Linnell. Where's Linnell? Is she here? Where's she, in the office? Oh, okay. She actually suggested this to me. It was in my head, but I didn't materialize it. I always say to people when I fly to them, whatever you're doing, have a back door, an alternate plan. So think about the following. If you've planned your flight carefully, fuel, weather, you know, all that kind of stuff, have an alternate plan. Because if you break off the flight and you proceed to the alternate, psychologically, there's not that pressure on you. If you get to Harrismith and you've got no alternate plan, what are you going to do? You're going to push your luck. You're going to descend over the top and fly through the valleys. And KwaZulu-Natal is like a big spider web of power lines. Think about that. I've been through those as well. Okay. Alternate plan is very important. It turns failure into simply selecting the alternate plan B, allowing the pilot to psychologically save face as such by eliminating the stress. Okay, that's the only real picture I think I've got in my whole presentation. That happened quite a few years ago. Okay, why did it happen? Because of something called, what I mentioned to most of you, repetition, complacency. The airline pilots will agree with me. Automation is dangerous. I'm flying helicopters now that have 4-axis autopilots and auto-hover capability, and you can't disengage some of the systems. They're forcing you into automation, which is not a good idea. I did Transnet's IF renewals for 4 clients about 4 or 5 months ago. And they did their IF tests completely without touching the controls. Because the 109s there are 4-axis auto-hover capability. So what I did afterwards, I disengaged them and took them to Virginia and said, fly manually now, do a single engine approach, do a hydraulics off, do an auto rotation, all that stuff. Because automation makes you complacent. It's dangerous. You know, I've mentioned to you, Adam. You met Adam, Richard Fies when he was here. He's a captain on the A380. That thing taxis on the autopilot. It's ridiculous. He told me if it lands on the runway and senses there's not enough runway left, it applies maximum braking, not the pilot. That's the level of automation in that machine. You could probably tell me, you probably can take off on that thing and land without touching the controls. Not take off. Okay. Wow. So all the pilot does is take off, and the rest of the time, no. Okay. Okay, repetition and complacency are the greatest enemies. The constant repetition of the same old procedural checks and balances of flights involved with aircraft operation. This guy that pranked, this 407 for him was like riding his car to Olifantsfontein and then back to the Vaal where he lived. He did it every day. So what do you think happened? And he had an autopilot. He flew into this hill with the autopilot on. Okay, the constant repetition invariably leads to procedures becoming automatic, almost done on reflex based on muscle memory. If you do a limited power takeoff, hot, high and heavy, whatever you're doing, say at an airport like this, do you focus on what you're doing? You're doing a precision transition, okay? You're not bucking the horse to get away because you might overtalk or overtemp. But are you thinking about it? You're not. It's muscle memory. You're doing a precision transition without thinking about it. Okay, don't think about the argument you had with your wife the previous night. That's distracting you. Focus on the machine, 110%, and the environment. If you don't focus on the task in hand, the constant repetition inevitably leads to a total lack of cognizance of what they are seeing. In other words, you do not register what you are perceiving or react to it, and in some ways, in some cases, even deny it. You've all heard of paradigm. What the pilot thinks and what's actually happening are two different things. He builds a picture for himself. You've all seen accidents on TV and what happens with people. Do you all know William Rukin Smith? Most of you know him. He was a training captain on A320s in SAA, and he told me the biggest problem they had with those machines was not the machine. It was pilot mismanagement of the flight management system. Did you people all see that one TV thing where one pilot was holding the stick back on the A320 and the other one was pushing it forward? And the computer was saying, what do you want to do? And it stalled and killed everybody on board in the ocean. A French machine. Okay. Complacency again. I'm not going to mention the name. It is virtually impossible to address all the hazards facing a pilot, but a good culture of airmanship and a focus on safety should provide the average pilot with adequate protection from the more mundane pitfalls of operation. Right, let's continue. That's the accident. That wasn't the whole report, and I blanked out his name. On a VFR night flight, didn't have a night rating, huh? And look at the time that he was flying. He left Olifantsfontein at 20 past midnight. And the airlines weren't flying on that day. The last person he spoke to was Dave Bard on the radio, telling Dave that he was lost. And he'd re-engaged the autopilot, and instead of flying direct to Olifantsfontein, he ended up flying across the GF area into that high ground. If he'd been 200 foot higher, he wouldn't have hit it. He wouldn't have known about it. But all four of them were killed. Okay, hazards. How many instructors are there here? Put your hands up. Oh, there's plenty, huh? You. Pilot mental state. This is an immense field, which I will address later in this presentation, and to which Johan Coetzee will be speaking on intensely later today. I will now address critical conditions related to the king of aviation science. And what is that? Aerodynamics. Just bear in mind, people, as pilots, whether you're flying an R-22 or one of those 747s in the corner there, you're dealing with aerodynamics and energy. It's just a different handling technique. That's all it is. So think about the simplistic stuff. Don't forget it. The critical conditions in this slide should be addressed and introduced into the practical flight training exercise to facilitate identification, avoidances, correction, and recovery action from these conditions. In relation to the aerodynamic conditions that cause problems, it must be borne in mind that these relate to direction of relative airflow on the relevant lifting surfaces, both main and tail rotor, and not necessarily the attitude of the aircraft or wind, although these can be deadly contributors to the development of these critical conditions. If you, in an anti-clockwise rotor, do in still air conditions a very rapid turn to the right, you can introduce LTE with no wind. I experienced vortex ring in a Drakensberg hovering next to a waterfall with one of my clients. In the hover, there was an updraft. So you think about relative airflow. Don't think about, look, the wind and the conditions can exacerbate the situation. But think about relative airflow on the lifting surfaces. That's what counts. Okay. Yeah. What must be borne in mind that when these critical conditions are demonstrated in a training environment, it is within a controlled situation with the flight instructor forcing the aircraft into this state and not operating outside his or her own limitations. In real-life situations, the onset of these conditions can be extremely rapid, aggressive and violent given the right aircraft configuration and environment. The most common and the ones that cause a high percentage of accidents are as follows. Now, before we move on, I used to demonstrate LTE to people, and I normally did it from 1,000 feet for safety. And I demonstrated to one client one day, and the machine went into real LTE, and it rotated 360 degrees and fell 700 feet in a matter of seconds, because it was dramatic and sudden. The bottle of water that was under my feet hit the perspex in front of me because of the centrifugal reaction and the rotation, the rapid rotation. I mean, if you look at accident status and see how many machines are subject to LTE and vortex ring, yeah. Don't confuse translational lift when you're moving forward or decelerating. The vibration level you experienced is not LTE or vortex ring. Don't get confused. Vortex ring, the aircraft will shudder and start yawing and also pitching and rolling in what we call incipient vortex ring. Okay, so be careful. A lot of people get frightened on a confined area approach when they get that shuddering from the change of airflow on the rotor system. Just mentioned it to them as instructors that it's not a vortex ring situation. Okay, so relative airflow is important. Think about that. Relative airflow on the lifting surfaces. What I've found as an instructor and a DFE in this country, the ex-Air Force guys will agree with me, airmanship gets neglected. We see people hover taxiing past machines with their doors open and their panels open, and they don't worry about the downwash. Have any of you been close to a 222 when it lifts off and touches down? There's about a 60-mile-an-hour wind coming out from under that machine. One of them landed next to me on an R22 on one of these pads one day, and it nearly blew us over. Okay, don't underestimate the downwash on a machine. 407's got a pretty substantial downwash as well. And that is called airmanship, which is good manners in aviation. Give way to other people. If I'm coming back from the GF and I know there's lots of fixed-wing students in the circuit and there's one guy on finals and they clear me to cross, I always cross behind him. Because those of you who are instructors know that students have huge pressure on them. They don't want a helicopter passing in front of them while they're on final approach for a runway. So think about all those things. Think about the simplicity again. Refocus on the simplistic stuff in your heads. Okay, that's repetition. Complacency. Don't get impatient with your students. Don't scream and shout at them. Don't slap them. Don't jab them in the ribs. Doesn't work. The minute you do that psychologically, you cause resentment, and that's the last thing you want in the cockpit, which is a very intimate environment. Okay, we're going to discuss CRM a little bit later, but CRM, you have to work as a team. You'll see when we discuss it later. So don't cause resentment. Don't scream or shout at your student or call them a poopo because they're doing something wrong. It's not going to help them. If you cause resentment, you'll start arguing with each other and you'll forget about the most important thing that the FAA has registered, which is fly the machine first and then deal with the problem. How many times have you seen accidents where the crew start working together and forget to fly the aircraft? It's happened to me a couple of times as well. So be careful. Buddha? How long have I been talking rubbish? Is it time for a break or not? Okay. All right, let's just finish these emergencies. Downwind takeoffs and approaches, I see that frequently, okay? It does not help you to do that. It's dangerous because it increases your touchdown speed, your ground speed. So think about the logic and the simplicity again. If you're operating into wind, you reduce your ground speed. Auto rotations in a training environment. There's more accidents in a training environment with auto rotations than actual engine failures, statistically. And that is during emergency situations and simulations. If you've got a good culture of airmanship and aircraft handling and safety focus, should provide the average pilot with adequate protection from these contingencies. Don't practice auto rotations on your own. You're not allowed to do it. Only instructors are allowed to do it. I find a lot of aircraft owners doing auto rotations on their own. Insurance will just say, no coverage, pal. Forget it. You're not an instructor. As mentioned in the previous paragraph, a good culture of airmanship, aircraft handling, and safety focus should provide the average pilot with adequate protection from these contingencies. Don't do it on your own. Basically, every 6 months, you should book an advanced training session with an instructor, and you can introduce, technical and the other stuff that I've covered with you. One of my clients who trains with me frequently, does dual checks with me frequently, had an engine failure in a Jet Ranger with 4 packs on board and landed in the veld without even scratching the skids because he knew what he was doing. You all know Mike Barnes. He had an engine failure in a brand new 407, landed safely. I did his PPC check last week, him and Eric. Vortex ring, what we've just discussed, is not necessarily in a situation where an instructor is demonstrating it to you and descending and showing you how it happens. As I said, I had vortex ring in a 407 hovering next to a waterfall. And everybody will say that's not logically possible. But there was an updraft, similar to the downwash. And the machine started shuddering and started settling. And what did the pilot do? Pulled up the collective. Luckily, we had 800 feet to recover, so I just said to him, push in the left pedal and fly out of it. Okay, so think about what I discussed with you, relative airflow on the lifting surfaces. Okay. All right, this is LTE. I'm not going to go through the whole of LTE, but the major cause of LTE is if you're doing a confined area approach at a low power setting, and you start applying power at the bottom. Because of the low speed and the high power setting, that vortex that is generated by the main rotor as you increase the lift, if you've got a 10 o'clock wind blowing, is going to blast that disturbed air through the tail rotor and probably cause LTE. I've had that as well. I've got that t-shirt too. Okay, any adverse wind will exacerbate this condition, but remember what I said to you, if you do a very rapid right pedal turn in still air conditions, you will induce LTE. Performance, height velocity curve. That's a Jet Ranger height velocity curve, which is only valid at sea level basically. And next to that in the flight manual, you all know as an instructors, is another chart or graph that indicates altitude and temperature, etc., to make this valid. Think about the Robinson. It's not one height velocity curve, it's 2. 407's got 4 strips of height velocity curves, varying on weight, temperature, altitude, etc. So this one is quite primitive. It hasn't been modified because it costs money. So what they're saying is if you want that height velocity curve to remain the same, you have to load the machine in accordance with the other chart. Okay. How many of you instructors know that? You all look puzzled. Okay. What else have we got here? Performance, out of ground effect, 0 wind, takeoff power on full throttle, etc., etc. Just read the chart. Power check charts. All right, we've all flown R44's piston engines. How do you establish the power on a piston engine aircraft, not just helicopter? On a turbine, you've got a real power check chart, which gives you a definitive power output at a given temperature and altitude. Tells you whether the engine is good or not. How do you judge a piston engine? Performance on a piston engine. The engine. Aircraft, helicopters, fixed wings. Performance of the aircraft tells you what the engine's doing. You've all flown weak 44s and strong 44s. You know what I'm talking about. You'll fly one which is sluggish and doesn't have enough power, and then you fly another one with full fuel and 3 packs on board, and it just gets out of the confined area at ultimate heliport. What is your rate of climb in a Raven 2 at 22 inches and 60 knots at average weight? Anybody know? About 1,000 foot a minute. Then you know the engine's good. Because whether the engine's good or bad, you're still going to see manifold pressure and the other things. You're not going to know except for that feeling. So observe and recognize and register what you see. What does the average 44 and 22 run on? Temperature, pressure, temperature of the oil and cylinder head temperature. Come on, guys, ladies. Within a needle width of 180 and within a needle width of 350. Whether it's an R22 or a 44, doesn't matter. And why do I say that? Because that gives you a definitive reference point. If you take off, and everything's in the green, when there's a change in any of those parameters, you've got no reference point. You can say, oof, holy cow, the oil temperature's increased, but I don't know how it's increased. But if it's increased by 50 or 60 degrees because you observed in flight what the temperature was, then you've got a reference point. I won't mention the name, but I flew 35 minutes and 6 circuits here at Rand Airport, and I pulled the circuit breaker on R22. So there was no indications of anything on the gauges, nothing. It kills everything. And the guy religiously said to me on every downwind leg, I'm doing my downwind checks. So after 6 circuits, I waited and I waited and I waited, and I just said to him, no, you were running on like Coming's reputation there, because there's nothing there. No temperatures, no pressures, no fuel, nothing. Repetition, complacency. Do not do hatches, harnesses, friction, size, shape, sun, all that nonsense without observing and registering what you see. Complacency, complacency. I see this all the time with people. We forget the simplistic stuff because of that. Think about that. I know that what's his face is going to chase me now. Density altitude. What's the average density altitude here now? What do you think? Anybody who flies at Henley knows. What is it? About 8,000 feet. Okay. In fact, you'll know, Adam, I think Airbus sent their machines out here to test them because of our altitude and our temperature and our density altitude. That's how high we are. We're sitting 1 mile above sea level on a plateau. And our summer temperatures, our normal temperature here on ISA should be 4 degrees. What's the temperature today? It's about 28 already. So it's ISA plus 20 most of the time. Who doesn't know what the standard atmosphere is? Or has forgotten? Or stored it so far in the back of their memories they don't apply it anymore? What I'm discussing with you is not teaching you something new. It's refocusing you on the knowledge in your heads. And I've done this with pilots as well. And applying the knowledge in your heads. Instead of doing that limited power takeoff just with muscle memory and not thinking about it. Process all the time. Because these things come down very quickly when the engine stops. Okay, so air density, atmospheric conditions, density, altitude is very important. What also influences density, altitude is moisture. This week we've had about 95% humidity the whole time. because it's constantly been raining every day for 4 days. And that affects your performance as well. There's only one machine I've flown in my career, it was a British one, that actually allows for humidity in the performance charts. So it does affect you. Remember, humidity displaces the air in that little block that you were taught about as a PPL. The heat makes it thinner. The humidity displaces the air, makes it thinner. Simplistic. Overloading. Yeah. Most turbine engines can be overloaded and still fly because they've got extra horsepower. The 44 you can overload. The Raven 2, the Beta 2. I had dinner with Frank Robinson because at an international championship in Oregon, he gave me an R22 with 7 hours on it. Brand new machine. I did a dual check with his instructor. I didn't even pay for the fuel. And I had dinner with him and his son. And he told me that the Beta 2 and the Raven 2 he designed for Joburg because of our density altitude. You've all flown the Beta and the Raven 1. The Raven 2 is very powerful. It's 20 horsepower extra in each one of those machines. I mean, for an R22, that's massive. The R22 is limited on manifold pressure even in the summer here. If you people read the performance charts. Is the height velocity curve of the 22 valid here? Vicky's shaking her head. Who else? Vickers, you're becoming a DFE. Tell me about it. It's not valid. Terry, just correct me if I'm wrong, but the certification procedures allow for up to 7,000 foot density altitude. The FAA certification procedures. That's a kind of a standard reference for them. So if you look at the performance charts and the height velocity curve, on the R22 they talk about 7,000 feet and not even maximum gross weight, 1,300 pounds. Think about that. Okay. All right, just to refresh your memories, to get back to what I started with. I know, look, he's frowning now. He's going to chase me off the stage. You only need to control 6 elements in a machine. Think about the following. Ground cushion, translational lift, and flare effect. Those are immensely powerful aerodynamic phenomena, which I've demonstrated to a lot of you. The other one, which is not my opinion, is rotor energy, speed and height. What is that? Height velocity curve. Abide by it and stick to it. Simplistic stuff. Break now. Are you all ready? Okay, let's just have another look at overloading. Bear in mind, limitations. If you exceed any limitations legally, you don't have a leg to stand on. This gentleman's going to discuss it with you. This gentleman, if he was legally involved with an accident or anything, would take a flight manual and know more about the pilot, about the aircraft after a week of study, and he'd reverse everything and change all the phrases, whether he's defending or prosecuting. Am I right? Yeah, and you talk to each other, discuss situations. Whether you're defending or prosecuting, it doesn't matter. The longer you keep people in court, the more money you make. So stay away from legality. I've been there as well. I got that t-shirt. Okay. Most modern helicopters will tolerate some margin of overloading, but don't do it. You're illegal. And you could easily have an accident or incident if you overloaded. That will place you squarely outside the legal parameters and render you indefensible in a court of law. How many of you that fly R44s actually check the mass and balance in it. What is this? It's a phone, eh? No, it's not a phone. It's a computer with a phone attached to it. What does it work in? If you take away all the software complications, how does this thing operate? Any computer in binary code, ones and zeros. What is life? If you set aside all the politics and the emotions and all the bullshit, life is a yes or a no. It's binary code. You lay out something on a table or think about it mentally, it's binary code. You've got to clear away all the complications and say to yourself yes or no. That's how I live my life, simplistically. That's why I'm not as bright as you people. Okay. Mass and balance, I encourage the use of technology because of all the machines, the different machines I fly and test on. But bear in mind, you might lose all that automation and all that other stuff and have to revert back to simplistic basics and raw data polling. In other words, managing the aircraft physically. Okay, how many accidents have you seen on the TV where people have mismanaged autopilot systems and crashed? Remember, the autopilot doesn't have a brain. If you ask it to fly into that hill over there, it'll do it for you. It's not got a brain of its own. You are still controlling the aircraft. Don't forget that. And it makes you complacent. Okay, aerodynamics. Do not forget the basic aerodynamics. As I've mentioned to you, there's 6 elements there that you have to control, and you'll never have a problem. Okay, aerodynamics, ground cushion, translational lift, flare effect, rotor energy, and kinetic energy, potential energy. That's the height velocity curve. Can you scroll down for me, please? Lastly, the 7th element, situational awareness, terrain, wind, environment, weather, legality, hazards. Is the aircraft serviceable? Is my license serviceable? Am I mentally in a fit state to go and fly? Am I physically in a fit state to go and fly? Don't fly with flu, because it blocks your channels here. And if you're climbing at 1,000 foot a minute or descending at 1,800 foot a minute in an auto rotation, it will cause you irritation and disorientation. Think about that. Okay, memory items, checklist items. If time, fuel, space, and height are available, identify the risk. Okay, now, I divide these into 2 elements, and you as instructors will all know. We have what's called memory items in aviation, which is good training and good reaction time. In other words, you have an engine failure during transition on takeoff. You can't reach for the flight manual and start studying it. It's not going to work. You have to react. That's good training and rapid reaction time. Anything else you do is a checklist item. Jam pedals, jam controls, warning lights, whatever. If you're turning and burning and flying, and as I said, if you've got time, space, fuel, and height, use it. And psychologically resist that mental impulse to land as soon as possible. That might kill you. If you just get something innocuous like a warning light, where's your focus? There was a guy killed in the R44 in Cape Town. You probably heard about that. Because Cape Town, you have to ask for start clearance with a helicopter. You're only allowed 1 machine in the circuit for training, that kind of nonsense. Sorry, Byron. ATC again. Anyway, this guy rented a machine from, you all know Philip Merrick. Okay, he rented a machine from Philip Merrick. He had 400 hours on R44s, and he'd owned one, so he wasn't a Mickey Mouse pilot. And we watched on the transponder, on the radar. He went up the coast to that general flying area in Cape Town. I don't know how many of you have been there, but you go past Esterplaat, the military base, onto the coastline, and you fly up for about 10 minutes, and there's a GF area there. And he just turned the corner by Esterplaat. And then for some reason, we saw him starting to orbit and doing some weird things on the radar because of the transponder. And what we assumed afterwards is that he had a warning light, and he was looking for a safe place to land immediately. And he picked a nice open field and flew through a power line on approach. Killed himself. Where was his focus? On the warning light. I've experienced that, and I'm sure all of you have experienced that. And what I say to people is, if it's something that allows you time, space, fuel, and height, the minute you start dealing with it, ignore the light or whatever you've got there, because you're now taking corrective action. In other words, I would just, on a jet range, for argument's sake, I'd push the warning light so it flips out and it's not glowing at me, because your eyes are automatically going to go there. Vicky, did I do with you failure of the 2 tachos on the R22? What were you looking at? The RPM gauge, 2 dead needles. No, that's normal. That is that repetitive thing that you've got to look at. So be careful of that. Identify the risk, evaluate and assess the risk if you've got time, space, fuel, and height. Process the options and the resources available. Have all of you done jam pedals? That's like an average thing now with instructors. If your pedals are neutral or right pedal with an anti-clockwise rotor system, what resource have you got available? A lot of people ignore it. Burn off fuel. What is fuel? It's weight, which is power. So if I was flying a 44 with full fuel, I'd fly around in a circuit, declare an emergency with a ATC, because I don't want the ATC saying to me, do a 360 on downwind for my student in the circuit. You take priority if you have a contingency or an emergency. If you land with any contingency, do not land on grass, because it might look nice from 500 feet, but when you get down there, there's rocks, there's anthills, there's big tufts of grass, anything that can roll you over. You can't roll over on tarmac. But what else do you need to do? If you land on tarmac with skids, there's going to be sparks. So ask the tower to put foam on the runway. Have the fire tenders on standby. As I say, time, space, fuel, and height. Go to an airport. It's a global picture, not just dealing with the machine and their contingency. Think about it globally. Burn off fuel, neutral or right pedal, depending on what aircraft you fly. Basics is what I'm discussing all the time. Memory items, checklist items we've discussed. Time, space, fuel, and height. And resist that psychological impulse. Any human being, if they've got a contingency, even if it's an innocuous warning light, they'll focus on that and they'll want to land as soon as possible. Why? You don't want to fly with that light on or the pedals jammed or whatever. Time, space, fuel, and height, use it. Remember that. How many of you have I shown that in flights and training? Put your hands up. Look there. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. Psychology of decision making. This should be kept as simplistic as possible. What should also not be forgotten is the simplicity of aerodynamics and energy management. The airline pilots will agree with me, Adam. If you're flying an R22 or a 747, you're dealing with energy and aerodynamics. Just a different handling technique, that's all. What should also not be forgotten is these elements which all pilots have learned and written exams and been lectured about is back to basics, which lie in the back of their heads and they don't apply it anymore. If you all, Vicky, how many hours have you got now? 7.5. So all of the stuff that you learn in the basic principles is here, but it's in the back of your head. Refocus, re-engage it, and use it. Okay. The simplicity can be illustrated by referring to modern technology which surrounds us. While I discussed with you computers, binary code, factors affecting decision making, recognizing distress. Think about the psychology of it. Physical effects, mental, behavioral effects, professional effects, pilot self-assessment, recognizing hazardous attitudes, stress management, use of resources, workload management, situational awareness, all these factors you need to consider. Okay, if you don't feel 100% to fly, don't do it. You're asking for trouble. These things fall out the sky very rapidly if there's a problem. So you need to be 100% focused on the machine and the environment, and your passengers if you're carrying them. Okay? Vicky, you're starting to look bored. Okay, look at that. How many people have you flown with that are carrying that kind of baggage? Most. All right, psychologically, you're looking at demeanor, the personal traits of the person, whether they're introverted, outgoing, OCD like me, old, cranky, and dangerous. And attention to details, self-absorbed or generous, communication skills, goal orientation, emotional state. Confidence, level of self-confidence, or overconfidence, level of arrogance, nervousness, anti-authority, impulsiveness. This is all affects your confidence. Macho, invulnerability, resignation, complacency, lack of teamwork, awareness and knowledge, lack of assertiveness, decision-making under pressure. Most of these negative elements can be defined as hazardous attitudes. Stress and fatigue, we've discussed that. Alcohol abuse, sickness, smoking and coffee. Scuba diving. I flew a scuba diver up from Sudwana once and I told him, take a 24-hour break. And he didn't. And he developed, what do they call that thing when you've got nitrogen expanding in your body? Yeah, he got red rashes on his arms. It wasn't serious, luckily, but he didn't take my advice. Because, think about scuba diving. When you're climbing up to nearly a mile above sea level, that's going to happen to you more quickly. All of these things you must think about. Okay, nitrogen excess, external factors, domestic or business, recognition of stress and fatigue, diet and nourishment, professionalism, attitude and approach to flying, preparation and discipline, level of interest and motivation, commitment, dedication, focus, safety awareness, leadership skills, and don't neglect airmanship. It seems to be something lacking in training today. If you look at engineers when they're working on machines and they're cutting safety clips and stuff like that, or they're stripping off locking wire, in the Air Force, the engineers used to carry a tin around with them and never drop that stuff on the tarmac or the apron. When I was working where the SAP is now, that was our training school. ANCOM, that old company, did a service on a Lear 35. They removed the engine, overhauled it, and when the Lear taxied out on the apron, it picked up a washer off the ground that went through the engine. And they had to remove the engine again and overhaul it. Have you all seen the picture of a Mirage running up on the ground? Intake on a Mirage is about this high. And there was a pool of water on the ground and there was a little vortex sucking that up into the intake on the machine. Think about the simplistic stuff. Okay, you can scroll down again, thanks. Post-flight assessment of both processes should constitute a comprehensive cross-section of the psyche of the candidate, behavior and conduct, ADM, during normal as well as stressful situations, general handling, communication, airmanship and safety. And, as I mentioned before, it should be emphasized for all of you that there's a vital need for self-education. I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example is a lot of pilots that I flew with as a charter pilot way back. Somebody once said to me that when I started flying, Jaws was a tadpole. Or I came off Noah's Ark as the first pigeon to fly to land. But some of my colleagues have for their whole careers stayed in aviation and just remained commercial pilots with no instrument rating, no instructor's rating, no progress. That is that repetition and complacency story. I've reached the top of the tree in terms of fixed wings and helicopters, because that was on my bucket list. So, I'm too expensive for most of you. I'm overqualified. Post-flight assessment we've discussed. Most aviation authorities worldwide set down certain guidelines for training. It must be borne in mind that these guidelines in the main only cater for minimum requirements and standards. And always bear in mind as an instructor that you are not going to go outside your own limitations to demonstrate something to a client or a student. You're not going to go outside your own limitations. You could have an accident. Okay. So bear in mind that giving instruction and training in the GFU is a controlled environment. Remember what I said to you about vortex ring, LTE. Think about airflow on the lifting surfaces and the fact that it can be dramatic and aggressive and very rapid. I've been caught, and it's scary. But how many of you have sat in a helicopter with an instructor demonstrating it and they struggle to get into vortex ring? And you sit there thinking, why is this so dangerous? Can happen very easily and very quickly. Also depends on the machine, eh? I'm not going to mention bells because Terry's here. But be careful of the aircraft. Fenestron-equipped machines are more subject to LTE than a normal tail rotor. The most effective thing in any helicopter is a conventional tail rotor because of its size and the volume of air it processes. Think about a Fenestron. Most of them turn in excess of 5,000 RPM at the back there. And they're shrouded. You get that much exposure of aerodynamics. You've all looked at a Fenestron-equipped machine. It's not the whole area. It's just these little blades in a ring. They're all nice and sharp, which means they'll stall more rapidly and more quickly than a conventional aerofoil section. And they're rotating at a fantastic high speed. So LTE in a Fenestron is something you need to watch. Anybody disagree with me so far? Terry? You sure? I need your opinion, but yeah. Okay. So far, so good. Yeah. How many people here fly as crew members? 2 pilots in the cockpit. Most of the EMS people. How many of the rest of you? Ultimately, with their machines, their Antarctic and stuff, we always fly 2 crew in the 412. This is problematic. To give you an example, when I left the SAF, SAA was comprised of ex-Air Force pilots, and most of them actually only did a 5-year short-term, a short-term, applied themselves as a short-term 5-year commitment to the SAF, and then went to the airline. That was their plan. So most of the guys who flew in the airlines in those days in SAA were you and my colleagues. Eh? But they had a bad attitude. You'd never questioned the captain. When he was in the cockpit, he was a god, so you'd never questioned him. Am I right? I know for a fact that there was a woman who was a 747 captain in British Airways, applied for a job here, and they turned her down because of her gender. She was a 747 captain, and British Airways in those days was not a Mickey Mouse organization. That's what happened. So crew, be careful. Give you an example. I was a CFI and the chief pilot at Ultimate Heli for a while, not employed by them. They just paid me a monthly fee. And the first time I went to the Antarctic was when we went down for Shackleton's wreck. That was in 2022, February. And one of the youngsters that I trained and tested at Ultimate Heli, Waldo Fenter, some of you might know him. When we went down there, it you're flying off a ship, eh? So you're not at an airport. So I said to him, before we fly, let's have a briefing about what we're going to do. If we have any contingencies, we're going to have to land on the snow or the ice, because if we land on the boat, we might cause a fire and cause more problems. And then I said to him, this is a guy I tested, done his 412 conversion, done all his PPC checks. I said to him, you're the captain, because I've never been here before in this environment. You know what it's about. You've been here. And he was taken aback. He kind of looked at me because of the experience gradient between us. That's not the point. We were a crew. I said to him, if anything occurs where you think I can technically handle the machine better, let me take control. But you stay the captain. You understand what I'm saying to you? You're a team in CRM. It's not Captain God and this oak must sit there quietly and not touch anything or say anything. That's what happens. You've all seen this. You work as a team. Did you all observe that Augusta 139 that had a runaway FADEC system? The two crew, it was the best airmanship I've seen work together. One guy flew, the other guy managed the overspeeds on the rotor and the engines by manipulating the fuel flows. But they couldn't control it. They did 5 circuits at an airport. Time, space, fuel, and height. And eventually they approached the runway at 140 knots and cut both engines and did a power-off landing. And all they damaged was the right landing gear. 14 people walked away. That is airmanship and CRM working together. So whether you're the captain or the co-pilot, Vicky, if you're flying with me and I make a decision as a captain and you're not happy, mention it. The bottom line is if you don't, you're both going to die in the same cockpit. Think about that. Think about that. So if you're not comfortable with a decision that a crew member makes, chirp. Don't cause resentment. Just say to them, listen, I don't like that plan that you've got. Let's just go through it again. Don't say, you're flying like an idiot now. What is your problem? The minute you cause resentment, what's going to happen? You forget to fly the machine. You start arguing. I bumped into people. There was one guy that went to the Antarctic that I would never fly as a crew member. He questioned everything you did. And he was bombastic and arrogant. You don't want that kind of guy next to you. You work as a team. Remember that. You police guys, you fly as teams or a single pilot? Single pilot. Yeah. Single pilot is also CRM, eh? Think about it. Make decisions. Don't think about what would Andre do? What would Jerry Broberg do? That's called peer pressure. You make a decision based on your level of experience. How many times have I asked you people, where is the safest place to be in aviation? On the ground. Make a decision. Okay. You're all looking bored again. CRM, yeah, let's scroll down a bit. That's fine. Yeah, I'm thinking about the following. You all know about that accident that happened decades ago at Tenerife with 2 747s that collided with each other in instrument conditions. The factors that caused that problem were simplistic. The Dutch guy who was flying the 747 was the captain, mainly flew simulators, and he had a paradigm in his head. And also, because of FDPs, he was running out of time and space. Because remember, all those aircraft were diverted to Tenerife because of bad weather. And when he wanted to refuel, he was standing behind other machines, including the one he collided with. So it was using time, and he was getting stressed. So they lined up on the runway. How many of you saw the fog this morning on the roads when you drove here? That was the kind of weather they had. They couldn't see. And then the one machine that had to take off as well, I forget what airline, it was American Airline, came taxiing down the runway, and they were told to turn off at the 3rd taxiway, and they missed it. So they delayed. They were on the runway for longer to the 4th taxiway before they turned off. They actually started turning off before that oak collided with them. Now what happened with that Dutch captain? he said, all right, let's go, and fire all the throttles. And the co-pilot said to him, but Captain, we don't have a takeoff clearance yet. But he just carried on. How many people were killed? 658, I think, if I remember correctly. CRM. Again, same situation. If I was the co-pilot, I would have retarded the throttles and put the brakes on and said to him, we don't have a takeoff clearance yet. You don't do that. What you also got to be careful of, not with a guy like Byron. Do you all remember that accident with the big TriStar airliner that crashed in the Florida swamps? Because it had a light bulb on the landing gear that wasn't working. Because it was a long time ago, there were 3 people in the cockpit. There was an engineer, a co-pilot, and a captain. They were on final approach, they lowered the landing gear, and they didn't get 3 green lights. The nose gear wasn't down. The engineer opened the hatch in the cabin, looking down at the landing gear and said it's down and locked. But the warning light. So what happened? They all worked on that warning light. ATC cleared them to maintain an altitude and go and hold over the swamps until they'd sorted their problem out. There were lots of factors again, and it included ATC, because they were circling there with the machine, fiddling with this, trying to get this light out and see if the bulb was okay. And the captain, while he was fiddling and moving, bumped the control column and disengaged the autopilot. And nothing dramatic happened. The aircraft just dropped its nose gently and started turning. And they were only at 1,500 feet above the surface. ATC called them from the tower and said, is everything okay? And they said, yes, everything's fine. 30 seconds later, the right wingtip hit the trees. Instead of ATC saying, hey, check your height and your heading, we see you descending, that would have saved them. It's always a combination of factors, and I've seen it and I've experienced it as well. Okay. Right. You remember Sullenberger, eh? You've all seen that movie of his. That was the right decision that Oak made. With the Lord as his co-pilot. And this is for... have a look at this, you two at the back. And there's a God and a co-pilot, which is a dog, and there's me and my co-pilot. Just read what's on that blackboard there. Buddha, we're done.
Buzz, thank you so much. Isn't it wonderful to learn from so much experience over the years? We're truly grateful, Buzz, that what you've done for the industry, that you prepare to part your knowledge with us. Fortunately, we don't focus on that, any of us. Is there any questions that you would like to ask Buzz? I think it's actually quite appropriate if there's anything that you would like to ask him, his opinion, what he's learned from over the years, maybe more specific. We can do that now. Nothing. Vicky, jy nie vir ons ietsie? When Buzz, for all the aspiring instructors out there, particularly the young ones that have just qualified, what is the one thing that you would like to share with them that they can take throughout their career to hopefully one day have as a successful instructional career like you've had?
you have to take note of experience levels. I mean, a grade 3 instructor is basically an apprentice who works under supervision. Now, I know some companies who sent a grade 3 to Durban and they're staying here. The grade 3 should be in the same hangar as you, so you can supervise him, fly with his clients, his students, you know, the 10-hourly dual checks and all that kind of nonsense. Okay. Psychologically, again, they all feel, what's the phrase I'm looking for? They all feel under you. Like if I'm the CFI or you the CFI, they all feel, you know, they look up at you. Experience is something I cannot give any of you. I can teach you experience, but I can't give it to you. But I can show you experience. So think about that. I wasn't born with a collective in one hand and a cyclic in the other. I also had to start learning to fly. I used the whole soccer field in the Alouette 3 to learn to hover. Okay? So think about that. Think about the psychological aspects, the level of experience, all of those things count. Okay? And remember, as human beings, we're all unique individuals. Don't forget that. You can't generalize with people, especially as an instructor. You've got to make an assessment and communicate with them like a chameleon on their level so that they understand what you're telling them. Okay.
Thank you, Mbaz. Any other questions? Mbaz, thank you so much. It's been a privilege listening to you.